Hey, what's up, Jamie? I appreciate you coming on, talking with me a little bit today about your business, Synergy Home, building science and insulation in general today. So I've known you for, I don't know, 15, 16 years now. I think you started as an HVAC salesman for a different company when we first met.
Yeah.
And
So I
and then you,
started my career as an air duct cleaner all the way back when I was 19, back in 1994.
okay,
I've been in the game a long time and literally started from the bottom. I moved into the sales side about 2000, and then
okay,
started my own business in 2014.
okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember when you started Synergy Home. I knew it was after 2010 or so. So what all does Synergy Home do?
Well, so we're multiple businesses inside of one, basically. Heating, cooling is at my core because that's what I've done for now almost 31 years. But as we talked about, heating and cooling is only as good in a space as the insulation is. They have to work together. And when I opened the business, I wanted to also offer insulation because I believe the synergy of the two, no pun intended, are really what makes a house comfortable and energy efficient. No two other things are going to impact that home better than the HVAC and the insulation. And no two other things can be detrimental to the home if it's done improperly. You and I both know that, mold issues and air quality issues, a lot of times it comes from bad HVAC or a bad relationship between the HVAC and insulation. So
Yeah.
it was critical for me and my team to understand the nuances of how those two things work together so that we can leverage it for good and then fix it when it's a problem. In 2014, when we first opened, solar was not a very big thing in Kentucky, and I'd been an advocate for it for 5, 6 years prior to going into it. Or at least I'd had my certifications for that long. I've been an advocate for longer than that. So I got really big into solar. By 2019, we were the largest company in the state offering solar. In 2022, about 75% of the solar contractors in the state of Kentucky went bankrupt all at once, which was
Wow.
a really, yeah. Within 18 months, we lost 6 major players. In the last 10 years, I've watched 12 go bankrupt.
And what do you
So,
think that is?
well, that particular all at once was because of interest rates. A lot of the solar companies, especially the door knockers and the kind of slightly shady companies that were out there, they were really aggressive at financing solar.
Yeah.
And if you can go into a house and say, all right, Eric, your electric bill is $200 a month. If I can give you solar and give you a 25-year payment at, say, $175 a month, well, you're $25 a month positive cash flow, right? So you can kind of get behind the math there. And as the electric rate starts increasing, your cash flow gets better and better. And at some point in that 25 years, you're actually going to pay for the solar and you'll be profiting, but you're going to win every month. Little win, but now you own your utility. One of the
Hmm.
common phrases those companies used is don't rent your utility, own your utility, right? Because everybody else is just renting their utility.
Yeah.
Well, that math worked okay when interest rates were around 2 and 3%, all the way up to 5%. You can make that work. But what the consumer doesn't recognize, if I'm selling you a solar system and I'm financing it for 25 years at, say, 2% interest, the finance company is charging me 25% interest on the back end that I have to build into your invoice to make it affordable for me to sell it to you. So
Hmm.
yeah, you're technically paying 2%, but you paid 25% and you didn't realize it. And when interest rates got up around, 9 and 10%, there was no way to bake in those 25% fees in order to make that work. So in today's world, most nobody that's going solar is financing it. Most everybody is, they might be pulling money out of a home equity line or something like that, but that's a different, secured money is always going to be a lot cheaper than unsecured. And I even tell homeowners in the world of solar, you're looking at about an 8% return on investment. If you're doing the true math on what it's going to save you, factory in tax credits, solar's about 8% ROI. Now, if you got money sitting in a 3% CD and you want to cash that in and make 8%, now that
Yeah.
math works.
Yeah.
If you want to go borrow money at 9 or 10% to do solar, the math doesn't work.
Yeah.
So most people that are borrowing money for solar probably aren't ready to go solar yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always thought that, I mean, your utility bill needs to be probably more like $400 or $500 a month for it to really make sense. I mean, if your bill is $200 a month, it's going to be pretty hard to justify putting solar on
Believe it or
before doing
not,
other things.
yeah, I was going to say, well, and I'll get to doing other things in a minute because that's the whole concept of my business, right? It's all holistic. But in
Mm.
the world of solar, the sweet spot is about 200 to 300. If you're under $100 a month, solar is going to take a long time to pay for itself. If you're over 300, you probably don't have the roof space to eliminate $300 worth of electrics. assuming we're residential infill, right? We're not out on acreage or something where we can do a ground mount. So most people are the 2 to 300. That's the sweet spot. But I approach solar energy much like I do diet and exercise, right? I'm losing weight right now. I'm down 50 pounds. It's easier for me to cut 1,000 calories a day out of my diet than it is to try to burn an extra 1,000 calories a day, right? So as opposed to if I can cut 1,000 calories, say I want to average 2,000 calorie a day diet. If I cut that down to 1,000 calories a day by maybe eliminating one meal and eating 2 small meals versus trying to burn, I mean, how much exercise does it take to burn 1,000 calories?
Some pretty strenuous exercise for an hour or two.
Yeah, I mean, you and I are both cyclists, so I mean, it's a 2-hour cycling ride to burn 1,000 calories. Or I can eat 3 less pieces of pizza and not have 1,000 calories to burn. Yeah. Your house is the same way. Yeah. If your insulation in your attic is only 6 inches, where the government recommends 15 and Energy Star is 20, but you're 1/3 the amount of insulation you should have, which means your bill is probably 3 times your heating bill. Is probably 3 times what it should be. I can go in and spray foam that attic for maybe $5,000 and make your home better, make it more comfortable, reduce your dust, lower your utility bill significantly. That $5,000 investment in spray foam might be the equivalent of $15,000 of solar panels. So if I can offer you both, I can make your home better, more comfortable, less dust, lower your utility bills, and you've got less glass on the roof. Yeah. Well, that to me makes all the sense in the world. So that's why about 90% of my solar customers also do spray foam. Probably 30% have us upgrade their HVAC at the same time. You know, that one's a little bit more of a harder math to justify. If you've got a heating cooling system that's 20 years old, now that math gets real easy, right? Because you're beyond your life expectancy. You know you need to replace it soon anyway. Do it now or do it later. But if you've got an HVAC that's 5 or 6 years old, then it's a little harder to figure that out.
Right.
But if we were to go into a very high-end inverter, variable refrigerant volume, like a Daikin Fit or something like that, on a house that say it's $15,000. Well, perfect. I actually have an example. I have a customer, it's about 3 years ago. We went out to Bourbon County. They're on a small farm, like a 5-acre farm. They wanted to put 50 solar panels on a ground mount. They'd already had a bid from another company. They were looking to use them. They got a referral on me. They brought me in. So I'm sitting on the back patio with the homeowner, and as we're chatting about the 50 solar panels, and they really want to keep talking about 50 solar panels. Yeah. And in their mind, it's who's going to give me 50 solar panels cheaper than the other guy, right? We had 2 companies here, right? They were mentally committed to 50 solar panels. But I'm sitting on the back patio, and I look over to my left about 30 feet away, and they got a 20-plus-year-old Lennox heat pump. Yeah. Heat pumps only last 12 to 15 years. So at 20-plus years, it's well beyond its life expectancy. And it appeared to be the only one for a pretty good sized house. So I asked one of them, I'm like, hey, have you considered upgrading the heat pump? And they're like, oh, well, we have a bid from so-and-so Heating and Air for about $18,000. We were planning on upgrading that maybe by the end of the season before we get into the winter. And at this point, it was maybe May. It was early spring. And I'm like, well, if you let me upgrade the heat pump and we can look at your insulation, instead of 50 solar panels, maybe we can get you down to 30. And if we get you down to 30, you're going to spend the money on the heat pump anyway. So if you spend, let's just say $50,000 for easy math. So if you spend $50,000 with me on your solar panels today and your heat pump dies tomorrow, well, you're not going to go without that heat pump. You're going to figure out a way to come up with the money for that. So why don't we do it all at once? Go ahead and upgrade the insulation, do the HVAC, reduce the panels down to 30. We're going to keep your expected outgo. You were already committed to about $50,000. So we're going to be the same project at 50, but you get a new heat pump and you get upgraded insulation. Yeah. And those customers, they've sent other people to us. They're like, oh my God, we would end up spending $20,000 more. And then if you end up having a credit with the utility in Kentucky, the utilities never have to buy that energy from you. They can bank a credit basically forever. So you don't want excess. We want to kind of be Goldilocks there. We want to be just right because you don't want to give them anything that you're not going to get in return. So yeah, I think that my business model makes more sense than any that I've talked to. And that's the reason why I've watched 12 solar companies go bankrupt. And, we had our best year ever last year.
Yeah. And for those who don't really understand the concept of solar, what we're talking about is, there's a certain amount of energy consumption that goes on in every house, right? And that energy consumption has a lot to do with the air leakage of the house, the insulation, the orientation to the sun, shading, HVAC, lighting, appliances, and all that stuff. And if you don't try to reduce your consumption first to lower your electric and gas usage, then you're basically putting a big Band-Aid on something that's leaking like a sieve. So it's like you got a cut artery in your neck and you're putting a Band-Aid on it versus going to the hospital and getting surgery to fix that thing first. So
Well, and
lower the consumption.
it's like me with the whole diet and exercise comment. I mean, I could be eating chocolate cake 3 meals a day and going out here and trying to run a marathon every afternoon, but that math isn't very good, right? So I'm eating, grilled chicken and lean protein, and then, cycling and doing some pool and some other stuff. So, but it all works together. And the great thing about it, if we use a building science approach to reduce your home's energy efficiency needs, then the free side benefit is a more comfortable, healthier home.
That's right.
So who doesn't want that, right?
Yeah. And that should really be kind of the primary drive. I mean, a lot of people want to do the right thing by putting solar on or doing whatever, but ultimately you want a healthy home, you want an efficient home, you want it to be as comfortable as it can be, reasonably. So that should really kind of be the primary focus, I think, that people take when they start talking about these kind of upgrades. And, before we started recording, you were talking about, some of the things that people tolerate in their houses, and they just accept it as it's part of the house. This is the way that the house is. And they just don't realize what they're missing. And I wanted you to speak a little bit to that kind of, the commonplace stuff that people tolerate, that they could fix relatively easily, potentially, and make their homes more comfortable, energy efficient, healthy, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, we talked off camera about my family. I built the first zero energy home in Kentucky in 2014. So my house was super insulated with spray foam, top, bottom walls, all the way into the basement subfloor. I did a geothermal system that was the Cadillac system on the market at the time. And then I did solar. So we've got all these energy efficiency. We've got the tightest house. Kentucky Utilities did the blower door on that house, and it was the tightest house they'd ever tested. And at the time, they'd tested over 35,000 homes. So it was stupid tight. Funny thing is, after they did the blower door test, like 2 days later, I realized the weather stripping for the door between the house and garage wasn't even on. So it was actually tighter than what they tested it as. So,
yeah. So there's another 150 CFM.
Yeah. It was so tight, if the kids would slam the door when they would run outside, you would feel your eardrums vibrate. So it was it was a tight house. But my family's grown up in that. We lived in that house for almost 10 years, and we just recently built a new house. So they were not used to tolerating things. And then we lived in a rental for almost a year while we built our new home. And the rental was on a crawl space that wasn't encapsulated, that had some mold issues. The previous owner had dogs. So the house smelled funny. The upstairs system, every time it came on, it had a filter grill in the hallway, and it would suck the filter grill up when it came on and then drop it when it went off. So we got to live in kind of a microcosm of all the things that people tolerate for a year, after living in perfection for the most part of the last decade. We're not in the house a full day. My wife wakes me up in the middle of the night. She's like, I can't breathe. The house is making me stuffy. It stinks in here. I wake up every time the filter pops when in the hallway. Tolerating smells, tolerating musty odors, which is coming from the crawl space, tolerating the sound of a bad air filter or just a loud furnace. These are things that the average consumer, you move into a house and you just adjust to it. I had a professor in college that talked about the boiling frog. I don't know if you ever heard this analogy or not. Yeah.
Yep.
So just real quick for the audience, if you haven't heard it. So a frog is a true amphibian. Its blood will be the temperature of the water around it. So if you put it in a pot of room temperature water and you turn the heat up on it ever so slowly, he will stay in that water until he literally boils alive. But if you put a frog in a pot of regular water and you turn it up really quickly, he'll get hot and he'll jump out. So most of us, we're that frog that are acclimating to the water around us. So, when we're in our living room and the air conditioner comes on and it gets loud and we have to turn the volume up on the TV to listen to it. I've seen people do that, and it's just second nature. They don't even realize they're doing it anymore.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, Eric, is that comfortable for you to do, that you have to turn the volume up? Well, I'm used to it. Well, you're not used to it. You tolerate it, right? And you don't have to. I mean, we've got furnaces now that are 70% quieter than the systems that you would put in 10 years ago. I mean, and that's not an exaggeration. Literally, their decibel rating is 70% better than it was 10 years ago. Outdoor units, we did a home and garden show about a year ago, and we had an outdoor unit, one of the side discharge Daikin Fit.
Mhm.
We actually had it running in the home and garden show. We'd ran power to it. It was so quiet. I ended up tying ribbons to it to prove to people that it was running. So, and then, we talk about smells, we talk about moisture. You and I have been in this game long enough. We realize that every crawl space in America needs to be encapsulated or conditioned at the very least. Every attic in America needs to be encapsulated. I know I believe that. I assume you believe that as well. And those things, if you look at the top and the bottom of our house, a house functions so much like a chimney, with the hot air leaking out and creating a negative pressure pulling cold air in. That's what we call stack effect. And that really triggers everything else that's going on in that house. So if we're looking to surgically alter a house in a major way, well, I can do it in the attic and the crawl space where you never see it in the living space. And I can improve a home sometimes 70 or 80%. I mean, we just did one in Lexington. They were one of the first all electric homes in town before the insulation code really caught up with the heat pumps. And they were paying $1,200 a month in electricity for a 3,800 square foot house.
Jeez.
We go in and encapsulate the attic and it drops to $300 a month in 1 month. And by the way, it was a worse month than the month before. So when we say we can reduce it 70, 90% by some really simple, what I call surgical building science measures, we're going in and doing things in the places that you aren't there every day. The average homeowner is not going in their attic, going in their crawl, even going in the mechanical room of the basement. But that's where guys like you and I have done this a long time. That's where we know where the problems are. And we know where to hone in on that and really make for that low hanging fruit that's going to make a big difference in homes. And most times we do it in a couple of days. We're in and out 2, 3, 4 days.
Yeah. I don't generally say every single house should be, have a conditioned attic. I generally say, like, if you have ductwork in the attic, if you have an HVAC system that's completely in the attic, if you have a ton of attic facing walls, those are the types of houses that can really benefit from a conditioned attic. But yeah, conditioned crawl spaces, absolutely. I mean, 99% of crawl spaces have ductwork down there. And as long as you don't have some kind of a drainage issue going on around the house or some kind of moisture issue in that crawl space, then go ahead and seal it off. Put a vapor barrier down there, spray foam the foundation walls, closed cell, go to the rim joist, encapsulate that crawl space or encapsulate that attic. But you do need to take into account any kind of moisture issues first or grading issues that you might have.
Well,
downspouts, extensions.
We've got to look at it holistically, know, and I was just at a customer's house today that called me out because they had some smell issues and ended up being a structural issue. Their siding was landing on the brick and you could see the lip was turned back in and water was running down behind the brick ledge.
Yeah.
I poked at a brick and it fell off and you see rotten wall behind it. I'm like, well, your problem's outside.
Yeah.
But about 90% of all moisture problems start outside. We had a customer, I hate new construction in my trade. Builders are not fun to work with and homeowners, a lot of times they don't have a realistic budget. So, anything goes wrong and they point fingers. So we as a company have not done new construction in almost 6 years. I did one last year as a favor for a semi-retired builder that had been a friend for 20 years that, he'd used a couple other guys over the last 2 years and they'd had problems. And he's like, hey, I know you're going to do it right. Do it. Please do it. We do it. Homeowners moving here from Colorado. So they're not used to the environment they're in. Immediately they get in and they complain that there's a humidity problem in their house. Well, we didn't do their crawl space. And when I went out to kind of investigate what was wrong, they had a massive crawl space problem and downspout issues on a brand new construction. Yeah. And they had spray foamed the floor of the living space. They didn't encapsulate the crawl, which I'm very much opposed to that. Yeah. And there's another big company in town that really pushes that method. If your HVAC equipment is in the crawl space and all your ductwork's in the crawl and you're insulating the floor, you're really doing the homeowner a disservice. We need to treat the crawl like it's part of the house.
Right.
But, we engage with them quite a bit over trying to find a solution. And the Mrs. Homeowner is like, hey, your air conditioner is creating a moisture problem in my house. And I'm like, man, that is physically impossible. By the laws of physics, my air conditioner cannot create moisture. It's going to capture it, drain it. If we had a drainage issue, we could create a water leak or we could create a problem. But we're not creating humidity or moisture in your space. Ultimately, after they did a lot of investigating, they realized that on the so the basement was half crawl, half basement.
Okay.
And on the non-crawl space end of the basement, they didn't seal the foundation. So they buried dirt up against raw concrete. Well, water will migrate through concrete more than 1,000 feet. So it didn't take long to figure out where the moisture was coming from, but they were quick to accuse the HVAC guy because, that's what you do in new construction.
Yeah, and I think with new construction, a lot of homeowners that buy new houses, they make some pretty wild assumptions that they don't realize that
Well, they would expect it to be perfect.
it's a perfect house. It's new construction, so everything's going to look right. It's going to be comfortable. It's going to be energy efficient. I mean, my old business was testing new construction houses day in and day out, and there was an endless supply of crappy built new construction houses that will cause problems from homeowners for years and years to come.
And that's why I don't have to do new construction, because I've got a lifetime full of jobs built in, ready to go.
Yeah.
I can just follow behind. There's
Yeah.
a builder in Lexington that was spending $1 million a year with me. No exaggeration. I fired him in 2020, and it was one of the most satisfying things in my life. And that's somebody that was spending $1 million a year. So I had to make a very conscious decision. At the time I was a little less than 5 million in revenue, and I'm firing 20% of my revenue in one phone call.
Wow.
And, but I can't tell you how many of his customers that I retained and were out there fixing the problems that he was basically insisted were being built into these spaces, you know? And it's like, hey, I can't make your customer happy if you're going to hold me to these odd constraints. And ultimately, I just chose doing a quality product over the revenue. And the funny thing was, the next year we grew by 30% and we didn't even miss it,
Yeah. Yeah. New construction is a whole nother animal, and we could talk about that all day. Frankly, it's just, the amount of weird stuff that I see getting installed into new houses, the way that they're framed, frankly, causes a lot of problems with air leakage and insulation. And, one of the things that I hope to convey to people, to homeowners, is that, you need to know the right questions to ask when you're contracting, whether it's a production builder, a custom home builder, or whatever. You need to know what questions to ask when it comes to insulation and framing and HVAC systems. Where's the ductwork going to be? How are you going to run the returns? Like, what are the exhaust fans going to be like? How am I going to manage the moisture, and what to look for when the house is getting built?
But those are all the last things that consumers want to talk about. They want to talk about granite countertops. They want to talk about crown molding,
cabinets,
hardwood floors, cabinets. I mean, my wife, when we built our new home, she was my laundry room is the most bougie laundry room you've ever been in. I have a crystal chandelier in my laundry room, not exaggerated. And it's got the mop sink and where we wash the dogs and all that. So it's an all-purpose room. But my wife's point was, that's her office, right? She's a stay-at-home mom. She takes care of the pets, the animals, the kids.
Spends a lot of time in there.
She wanted it to be her perfect laundry room. And it is, but had I not been involved, we wouldn't have spray foamed the house. We've got a backup power generator, which we lose power. And my youngest daughter is type 1 diabetic. So we probably keep $2,000 in insulin supplies in the fridge at all times. So if we lose power for 8 or 12 hours, I've lost $2,000 worth of life-saving medication. So to me, a generator is not an option. I have to have one. So we've got that. And then we've got the really high efficiency HVAC. My worst bill this winter was $236 for a 7,000 square foot home. The only thing that I've got that is gas, we heat our water with gas because I've got 2 teenage daughters. So I've got tankless water heaters and I cook on gas because I really like to cook. But our house is mostly electric. And for us to be 7,000 square feet with a $236 bill in January, we don't have our solar installed yet. I've got a new product that's coming out second quarter of this year that I've been waiting on. So I'll have solar if we don't slow down, I don't know when I'll get it put on, because we're booked out about 6 weeks on our solar crew. But once we get caught up, my house will eventually be zero energy.
Yeah. So what are some other things that people tolerate that they, probably are not aware of that they shouldn't be?
Smells are one. You've inspected a lot of HVAC systems. I've been doing it. Like I said, I started out as an air duct cleaner, and I remember back being a 19-year-old kid, we'd cut open the ductwork right next to the air conditioner, and almost always there's visible mold, or organic growth, whatever you want to phrase it as.
Especially if there's internal insulation in those return drops and stuff.
Yeah. And what's funny, I worked for a company that swore by internal insulation. Every job we ever did was internally lined. And, I didn't realize till 10 years later that we were setting people up for failure.
Yeah.
But when we were doing it, it was the conventional wisdom that it was the best thing to do. Another thing that I feel guilty about selling, we used to sell the bejesus out of power attic fans.
Yeah.
God, as somebody understands building science, those are one size fits all. You buy them at Lowe's. They're rated for a 16,000 square foot attic when most attics are less than half of that.
Yeah.
And they put the whole house on a negative pressure. Eric, I went in the house one time that was on such a negative pressure that when I was going into the attic and I lifted the little Luan attic hatch, it started floating.
Yeah.
It literally was on such a negative that it lifted it off my head.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to the homeowner. Of course, they hadn't lived in the house very long. And I'm like, did you recognize this? And they're like, well, I knew it was light. I'm like, no, it's floating. It's not light.
Well, that fan's on.
Yeah. And then they had moisture problems. And the wife was upset because their brand new carpet in the living room on the ground floor on a slab house had a gray line all the way around. It was a filtration line. And she's like, why is my white carpet? What's wrong with my house? And I'm like, well, they actually had 2 attic fans on a 1,800 square foot, 2-story slab home. And the attic was only 6 foot on center, 6 feet on center. So can you imagine the amount of negative pressure that was on that whole house?
Yeah.
I went downstairs and I opened the front door just an inch and I had her feel, it would part your hair. There was so much air coming through and there was no breeze outside. So, I sold 1 or 2 attic fans a month for 10 years of my career. And I wish I could go back to every one of those people and apologize because there's almost no situation that is a right fix. It's a bad thing.
That's actually a really good topic because I get a lot of questions about, hey, all the humidity in this environment, like we're in Kentucky, it's a hot, humid climate. What can I do to alleviate the humidity that gets in my attic? And a lot of roofers will just naturally say, well, install a powered attic fan, not realizing that what happens is it does pull air out of the attic and it also pulls air out of the house from wherever you have leakage between the house and the attic. So wherever your attic hatch is, wherever ductwork goes through the ceiling, electrical lines through top plates, drywall between top plates and stuff. So it literally sucks the cold air that you're paying for out of the house and into the attic to cool it down.
Well, and most consumers do not realize that prior to 2015, we did not have a standard in the state of Kentucky for how tight air ducts had to be. They could be as leaky as you wanted them to be, right? We didn't have to do testing or anything prior to 2015. I mean, there were best practices, of course, but actually testing, because that's when duct blasting went into effect, wasn't it? 2015?
The 2009 IECC got adopted, I think, in actually 2012.
Okay. Yeah. About there.
Yeah.
So for 80 years before that, the ductwork in your attic or your crawl space, and especially if you go into houses pre-1990, they don't have any sealing on them at all, right?
No.
So they're leaking about 20% on the supply and 20% on the return. So you put a big negative pressure with an attic fan, and you're potentially taking 40% of your conditioned air out of your attic or, crawl space, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, so you're either leaking it to those spaces or potentially sucking it in from those spaces. So going back to the smell issue,
Yeah, well, and dust and dirt and humidity and even critters, right? You're bringing in insects and things that you shouldn't be. But, to really hammer home the point, prior to the 2009, and consumers, they'll get hung up in the verbiage and all this. We got to be careful. The 2009 Energy Efficiency Code that we work on in the state of Kentucky, it was written by the federal government in 2009. That doesn't mean that the state of Kentucky adopted it that year. A lot of times we're 3, 4, sometimes 5 years down the road. So we didn't adopt a lot of that 2009 until 2015. But even in the most strictest code in Kentucky, correct me if I'm wrong, we are still allowed to leak 10% of the air from an HVAC system. So if you think about that, if your plumber was allowed to leak 10% of the sewage that they're getting out of your house, and if that was acceptable by code, you wouldn't be really happy with that, right?
Yeah.
Well, your HVAC is allowed to leak 10% outside of the home's envelope, and that's usually in places you don't want it to leak air from. If you're pulling 10% of the air that you're breathing out of your crawl space, and you've got snakes and mold and mice and other things, then that means that you're, quote unquote, filtering your air through a really bad place before you breathe it. Yeah. And that is 100% up to code. I hate the phrase up to code because typically we don't build up to code. We build down to the lowest lever that code will allow us.
This is the minimum bar that you got to hit.
Absolutely. Yeah. A code built house is the bare minimum. And I don't care if it's a track home builder that's putting in $700 a year and gluing it together with popsicle sticks, or a guy building 20,000 square foot homes. I've watched them both go to code minimum more times than I can count, especially when it comes to heating and air and insulation. Hey, you're going to get $20,000 worth of granite countertops, but you're going to get $10,000 worth of HVAC.
Yeah.
And then when it doesn't work, the HVAC guy is the guy that gets to, deal with the problems.
Yeah. And the thing about duct leakage in Kentucky, so the 2009 ICC now is 26 years old or 16 years old at this point, and the code is like 8 CFM of duct leakage per 100 square foot of area that it serves, right? So if you have 1,000 square foot house, it's like 80 CFM. But that's only accounting for the ductwork that's located outside of the living space or the conditioned space of the house. Like if you build a house on a basement and all the ductwork is technically inside the basement, the code says in our state that you don't actually have to seal any of that ductwork.
Or insulate it.
Or insulate it. And so what happens is you get a bunch of duct leakage in the basement. And so the
basement's freezing in the summer.
Yep. And the air doesn't get to the other side of the house where it's supposed to. So if you've got a house where it's, maybe it's 60 feet long and you've got the furnace in the basement on one side and the master bedroom's on the other, all that heat and air is leaking between the unit and the bedroom over here. It's still the code, but it doesn't mean it's working properly. So that's a big frustration. I can't tell you, how many, $1 million houses I've been in that have like just basic crappy HVAC systems.
Well, and here's the crazy thing about it. The way to seal an HVAC system, we have two products. We have foil tape, which is about $20 a roll, and you're going to use a roll on one house. So let's say $20 worth of tape, and then a 1 gallon tub of paintable caulk, which is called mastic in my industry, which is $12. So for $32 in materials and some time, you could take a less than good system and make it a very good system. So what corners are we choosing to cut?
Yeah. Even if it was $100, like
even if it was $500, right? You're going into $1 million home. So if you told that homeowner on the front end, when you're in the pre-construction meeting, hey, Mr. George, you're about to build this $1 million house. As far as the HVAC ductwork goes, I cannot insulate any of it. And your basement's going to be freezing and you're going to have dust and this end of the house isn't going to be comfortable. Or for $500, I can make it really well insulated and it can do its job like it's supposed to. What do you want to do? Well, if I gave you that option on the front end, you jump all over it. But the fact is the builders are like, hey, look at this shiny granite countertop and don't pay attention to this stuff over here.
Yeah. And I want to be careful here because I don't think that builders are necessarily being nefarious about this. I think a lot of them just simply aren't aware, or they have
education.
It's a lack of education. It's a lack of awareness. And it's also a lack of awareness and education on the homeowner side. So these are the kind of questions and conversations that I think anybody should be having with the builder or the remodeler if they're doing big additions or big remodeling projects. Remodeling projects in general are like a huge opportunity to fix some of these problems that they've been tolerating and may not be aware of over the last however many years they've been in that house.
So, when my wife was pregnant with our first child, she bought this book that every pregnant woman has, and it's What to Expect Before You Are Expecting. Right? Your wife probably had the same book.
Yeah.
Let's get together and write that book, What to Expect Before you build a remodel.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because how many things could we tell people, don't do this? I was in a remodel not long ago, and they had about 5 years ago, somebody go in. The exterior walls were not previously insulated. They had somebody go in the attic and do that drill and fill foam. Oh, man. When they took the drywall down, it looked like somebody blew up the powder factory. It was one of the nastiest, messiest things. And you could tell, the problem with that particular product is it's water-based. And if it goes into a 2x4 stud cavity that's relatively dry, the wood soaks the moisture out of it and it shrinks and ends up dry rotting.
If it actually fills the cavity.
If it actually fills the cavity. So it's a horrible product. And there's companies out there today pushing it. I see it on the regular. It's on TV right now. There's an ad for it. It's like, how many times have we gone behind that and we're very well documented that this is a horrible product, don't use it. But just like attic fans.
Yeah, that's one of those gimmicky things that seems like it's a good idea, and just to the unaware person seems like, oh yeah, I want to insulate my walls, but they also get sold on those injectable foams when they already have fiberglass in the walls. And I'm like,
to fill it up.
I'm like, man, there are so many better things you could spend your money on than injecting foam into walls that are already insulated. Like air seal the crawl space or foam the lid or do the condition, seal the ductwork, whatever. There's a bunch of other things that should happen first. And it's about priority and it's about understanding that kind of stuff. So,
well, and it's consumer education.
Yeah.
Well, you and I live in places that most people don't want to go, right? Most of our job is under the house or in the attic or in places that most people don't want to go. And that's where most of the low-hanging fruit is. That's where a lot of your heat is leaking out. I see these houses with 4-foot-long icicles on them, Well, we know you've got a leakage problem, be it your heating systems in the attic leaking a lot of heat, or you've got a very poorly insulated attic. But you should never, I mean, icicles here or there, that's going to happen, especially with the crazy weather we've had.
Yeah.
If you got a 4-foot long icicle, you've got a structural problem in your house,
Yeah.
but nobody wants to think about those things.
So what would you say, I'll kind of throw this at you as like a last question here. Like, what do you think is the biggest misconception that homeowners have, or the biggest misunderstanding that homeowners have when it comes to, home comfort, energy efficiency, and trying to make their house, better?
Well, let me give you two answers. The first answer, you don't need new windows. The window industry has done a really good job of advertising replacement windows, and all the big companies do it. The supply houses, Lowe's, Home Depot, those places all do it. The return on investment, the last time that I actually had a real calculation on it for replacement windows, it's over 100 years to replace them. Now, if you're replacing windows because you want a new look on your house, you're doing it for aesthetics, you want the pretty, and you're not worried about your energy dollar, replace your windows all day long.
Right.
But if you're looking at spending money for a return on investment, for air quality, for energy efficient, for comfort,
windows are not it.
Literally the last place I would look.
Yep, 100%.
Adding foam to insulated walls might be the last place. The windows is second to last place.
Yeah.
The place that's going to have the greatest impact, if you are on a crawl space, insulate the crawl space first. If you're not on a crawl space, then insulate the attic. If your crawl space is fairly well insulated or not vented, insulate the attic. But those two spaces, that's going to be where you're going to see the biggest return on investment, because I don't care how good your heating and cooling system is. If you have a poorly insulated house, you're going to be leaking all that high efficiency heat and air out into the space. So insulating and air sealing, and in my opinion, the only way to do that, or the best way to do it, most cost effective with the best results, is encapsulation with spray foam and primarily open cell, but we use both.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would suggest to homeowners as far as questions to ask a contractor like yourself before hiring you or anybody else, like some maybe 2 or 3 questions?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, I mean, it's so hard today because, as you well know, a lot of the major, especially HVAC companies, they've been bought out by venture capital, private equity. I was talking to somebody today, 8 of the top 15 companies in my market is owned by one corporation.
Really?
So, yeah. So they're coming in and they're marketing themselves as this heating and air or this heating and air. I've seen their commercials back to back, like they're advertising against each other.
And it's just a different logo.
Yeah. And they all answer to the same management team here in Lexington, right? I mean, like they pull around back behind the building and you got 4 different company trucks parking at one location.
Really?
So I'm not a big fan of the private equity people. I prefer to do business local. So that's one thing I would ask. But, I mean, what we're talking about today is building science, right? I would want to do business with a company that has a building science approach. And do you have people on staff that are BPI trained, or they're trained by ResNet or any of those companies? Those are really, really important, because if you don't, I got BPI certified 15 years ago, 2009, 2010. I was on the front end of this industry when I went through that training, and I was still blown away at how many things that I didn't know, and it, connected some dots. It opened some things. But, at the point that I did this, I'm almost 20 years into being a professional in this industry and still slap my head over, the attic fan, right?
Yeah.
When I first got BPI certified, I had no idea that I'd been selling attic fans for a decade, and I never should have sold the first one. And, going through and understanding about positive pressure, negative pressure, stack effect, all the different things. And it's like, oh my God, it all makes sense to me now. So, here at my staff, our comfort advisors are all going to be either BPI or ResNet trained, because I want my guys going in and seeing everything that I see. That way it's not just me. And I think I would not do business. I will have a caveat to that. There's a lot of certifications that we get over the years that are kind of a pain in the butt to maintain. Only BPI is one of those certifications. So I've been BPI certified. I've been through all the training. I don't currently carry my BPI certification because they made it too labor intensive to maintain it. NABCEP solar certification, same thing. It's a great product. It's something good. You've gone through the training. You've learned all the stuff, but keeping up on the certification is more trouble than it's worth. And really, most consumers don't even recognize those things. So once I've got the knowledge, I don't care about the certificate on the wall. But, like I'm a master HVAC license holder and a master electrical license holder. Those are much different. I had to be an HVAC contractor for 4 years before I could sit for a pretty rigorous test to get my master's license. I had to be an electrical contractor I had to be an electrician for 8 years before I could sit for the exam. And the exam has a 90% failure rate on the first try.
Really?
So it's a very difficult test. And in the state of Kentucky, it's easier to be a doctor than it is to be a master electrician. That's why the average age of a master electrician in Kentucky right now is over 65. Yeah.
So from a homeowner's perspective, ask about education, certifications, training, what do your guys do or what have they been through, I guess, at least. And then are you local? Are you locally owned?
Huge.
And then I guess another one I just think about is like, does the sales guy that come out actually know the technical side of things?
Well, and if he doesn't, the people coming behind him sure aren't.
Yeah.
So like if I go into a sales call behind 5 other people, I'm likely going to show you things that the 5 others missed. And that's what you really need to pay attention to is who's the expert in the room, right? If I'm going to invest with the company, if you're in a first time home rental that, is a small product, you're only there for 2 or 3 years and you want to go for the cheapest guy, I ain't going to argue the point. I get it. But if you're in your forever home and you want something that's quality, you care about comfort, you don't want to tolerate these things, you care about your indoor air quality, you're going to make an investment. Make sure you're doing that with a company that has a certain degree of expertise. And you can tell the difference real easy. I mean, if you bring 2 or 3, 4, 5, I've gone into homes, they were getting 7 quotes before. I promise you that my team are going to find things that nobody else found. And if you're looking for quality, you're probably going to do business with us. Another big one for us, we do backup power generators. We're a generator dealer. The vast majority of our competition, and when I say vast majority, greater than 90% of our competition is not licensed to do a generator completely. Because a generator is high voltage electricity, so you have to have your electrical master's license, and then it's natural gas, which is obviously combustible and dangerous if it's not done appropriately. So the only 2 people that are licensed to touch natural gas are HVAC contractors and plumbers. And the vast majority of our competition are electricians putting in backup power generators, and they're doing the gas unlicensed and uninsured.
So how's that getting passed by an inspection?
The inspector only looks at the electrical. Gas is not required to be inspected in the state of Kentucky. So, and if anything goes wrong, they're uninsured, right? So how are you going to get their insurance company to stand behind when they did something they weren't licensed to do?
If you're getting a generator, do you have a plumber's license or a HVAC license to do this?
Absolutely.
Or are you subcontracting it out to somebody who's actually licensed?
Well, and then the problem is when they're subcontracting it out, we call that a tail light guarantee. When you see their tail lights moving out the driveway, that's the end of your guarantee period, right? Anything that's subcontracted, that guy's doing it for $150 and you may never get him back there. Yeah. So if there's a problem 6 months from now, is it with the electrician that your contract's with who legally can't fix your problem? Or is he going to get the guy that, may or may not show back up? So do business with somebody that's got everything in-house. Hire a professional. It's what we do.
Yeah. And I would say the person that comes out, if you're getting multiple quotes, the guys or the girls that ask the most questions and they look around and they try to really figure things out are going to be the ones who understand things more and are going to give you probably a better product at the end of the day.
It's quite common for me to go into a home and be talking an HVAC replacement as an example. And the homeowner, especially if they got multiple bids, well, do you want to go to the outdoor unit or the indoor unit first? And I'm like, well, really neither, right? I want to talk about everything else that's going on. Well, everybody else, they just wanted to look at my equipment. And I'm like, well, what did they quote you? Well, they quoted me the same thing I've got. So, well, you've got a 50-year-old home that in the last 10 years, you've replaced your windows, you've upgraded your insulation. Your HVAC is 20 years old, but yet they're going to put the same thing in that you had 20 years ago. Well, your house has changed. Yep. So we want to talk about those things. So that's real important to me is, how has the building evolved over the life of the last heating and cooling? And then I don't trust the guy that was there 15 years ago to have sized it appropriately. I'm going to size it based on your needs now, not based on what somebody did 20 years ago who probably doesn't know half of what I know.
Or size the ductwork properly originally. So you don't want to put new equipment that's the same size on ductwork that was never sized properly to begin with. So you're never going to get the performance out of it that you expect.
We do duct changes on about 80% of the systems we pull out. A lot of times they're minor tweaks here or there, adding some return or whatever. But the reality is we know more today than we've ever known in the industry. So putting new stuff on old infrastructure really doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Usually what I find is the return side of the ductwork is almost always undersized.
Yeah.
So increasing the size of that helps a lot.
Doing blower door testing and static pressure and duct blaster testing, one of the more common things I run into, I was trained in the industry when I was in my 20s and we're doing new construction, that if you do a high sidewall return, that it's worth 200 CFM. That's what I was trained as, right? So you got a 14x6 grill, you got a you got a 16-inch center for your stud cavity. So if you take the studs out of it, you've got a 3.5x14-inch gap, which if it's perfect, yes, you can get about 180, 190 CFM. The reality is when the framers nailed those studs to the floor, when they're standing that wall up, they came in 2 or 3 inches inside of that, and you got 2 big old nails here and 2 big old nails here. So the installer that's cutting that bottom plate out, they're never giving you a 14-inch perfect square.
Right.
They're coming in because they're not going to fight those nails, you know. So when I go in and do an existing home and do an air quality test or airflow test, it's rare, and I mean rare, that we see a high sidewall deliver 100 CFM when they're rated for 200 if you make the assumption that everything in the chain is done the way it's supposed to. So if I'm walking into an existing home and I don't have my flow hood, I'm just going to count it as 100 because that's what I normally count it as, or that's what I normally find it actually is. And if you do that when you're rocking around a house, like I said, about 80% of the time you're under on return.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, a static pressure test alone on the return side will tell you whether you're undersized or not.
Well, and a lot of the nicer equipment has that built in. You know, the Carrier Infinity system, the Duct Fit, it's going to do a static pressure when you turn it on. And the reality is most of the installers don't know how to read it. So you put a brand new system in. I went to a lady's house that had a 3-year-old Carrier Green Speed. At the time, it was the nicest piece of equipment on the market. And she was having problems with it, and the other company couldn't fix it. So I walk over to the thermostat. I run a static pressure test on it to kind of figure out where we are. And it takes 3 or 4 minutes to run it. And it was like at 1.67 in static pressure. Well, it's rated for 0.5. So it's
3 times more than.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, ma'am, who put this in? And she's like, oh, they're very reputable. They just can't figure out what's wrong. Well, they're not reputable because the thermostat is telling me what's wrong. I didn't even have to go very far. I've been in a lady's house less than 10 minutes. And we ended up doing a full duct replacement because it was in such bad shape. So they sold her a $20,000 piece of equipment on a really crappy duct system. And then she started having problems after the new system. She actually didn't have problems when she had the old single stage piece of equipment in there that, was a little bit more forgiving, right?
Yeah.
A Chevy pickup truck doesn't have the repair and nuances that a Toyota Prius or a Tesla does, right? I mean, they're different pieces of appliance. They're different technologies. That old, 1997 Trane air conditioner with an 80% gas furnace is nothing compared to a 24-SEER Carrier Green Speed that's, refrigerant volume systems and, the blower is moving at the same time as the compressor. I mean, we're in a total different animal than what we were even 10 years ago. And if you're not evolving the duct system to match that, then you're paying a whole lot of extra money for wasted technology that you're never going to see the benefit of.
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is they think that the HVAC, the equipment is the system, and the system includes the ductwork and the registers and everything together to work as one. And if they don't understand that, which frankly, a lot of HVAC companies do not, then they end up doing this kind of stuff. They put a really expensive box on a really crappy piece of ductwork, and it just never works as intended.
Absolutely.
So, well, this has been great, Jamie. I really appreciate you sitting in here with me and talking about all things energy efficiency. Anything else you'd like to leave us with?
No, I'm like a CrossFitter or a vegan, man. I really like to talk about what I'm passionate about. I'm glad there's somebody like you out there doing the podcast. Hopefully a lot of consumers will pick up on stuff like this and we can help people make good decisions.
It's really the bottom line of why I'm doing it. So again, I appreciate you coming on. I'm sure we'll have you on again.
All right, man. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jamie.